living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Is intimacy a point of conflict in your marriage? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and you're listening to Relationship Prescriptions. Well, it certainly is for many marriages. Intimacy tends to be one of the top challenges that couples face. Now, a warning, just as we get started, we'll be talking about some fairly explicit and intimate things here. So if you have little ears around that this might not be appropriate for, you might just pause and occupy them otherwise before resuming listening to this. Sex and intimacy are not the same. When we say intimacy in marriage, we're often talking about sex, but I want to remind you that although they are very related, they are certainly not the same. Today, I especially want to talk to women, to wives, whose husbands are frustrated because they are not getting the sex that they wish, that they desire. Now, that certainly is not all marriages. And whenever I talk about this, I always have to start with some disclaimers. And although it makes me sad to have to start with that, I believe it is important. There are certainly marriages where the desire for sex in the wife is greater than the desire for sex the husband has. Some say 20-25% of marriages, that's the case. There are certainly marriages where there is abuse going on that is incredibly destructive and toxic. Those are not the kinds of situations I'm talking about. I am not saying in this podcast that for you, wife, every time your husband wants sex, that you're obligated to give it to him. Absolutely not. He is not entitled to that. Having more sex will not fix your husband. Not all sex is good sex. There's sex that is exploitative. There's sex that results in even more division and resentment. Sex is not just about your husband's pleasure at all. But with those disclaimers out of the way, I want to talk to you, wives, about what sex does for your husband, and an understanding that I believe will help you understand some of the dynamics between you. I received this note just within the last 24 hours, actually, and I believe it expresses quite well what this perspective is. This came from Bettina. And she said, there are women who feel close to their husbands emotionally, supported and loved in every way, but they aren't interested in sex. I know this because I was one of them. I am on antidepressants, and that does interfere with my sexual desire, but if I'm not on medication, I'm very depressed, and that's not good either. For a very long time, I simply ignored my husband's sexual advances most of the time and behaved as if there were no problem, although I knew he was very frustrated. He felt like he had to beg me for sex, and over time he felt unloved as a person because I didn't react to his sexual advances, although I saw all the other things he did for me and our children. And I truly loved him. I'm not sure how he actually managed to stay so loving and patient during this time. We talked about it often. I absolutely did not realize how different and therefore important sexual intimacy is for a man. The importance has nothing to do with the physical act itself. That's what many women believe, and I did too. But men feel unloved and rejected deep inside, and rejected as a person when they are constantly sexually ignored or rejected by their wife. I'm not talking about the occasional rain check. My husband isn't ignorant. He knows what's going on with me, emotionally or physically, and he doesn't expect anything when he thinks I'm upset or busy. He's also okay to wait a couple days without taking it personally. But to men who are sexually rejected or ignored over and over, it's like telling the wife daily, you are unlovable as a person and there's something fundamentally wrong with you. But that's pretty much what we expect of these faithful husbands. They surrender themselves fully to another person when they get married, and they rely on this person to fulfill their needs for being loved. If the wife behaves as if he didn't exist or weren't worth the effort, they must feel horrible and trapped with no hope for the future. That's cruel. Sex has never been unpleasant for me. I just felt like I could go without it for a long time and not miss anything. Since I understand now the fundamental differences between men and women, I feel much more open and happy to loving my husband physically as well, since I love him as a person. I am so glad I figured this out before it was too late. It has improved our relationship so much. My husband is more relaxed and happy, and the more sex we have, the more I desire it. Now, that is a wife who has come to understand what difference sex makes for a man. Now, again, nothing I'm going to say here undoes the disclaimers that I mentioned at the top of this episode. But I am talking now about marriages where both husband and wife are basically people of goodwill. And in that situation, the lack of sex does it hurts a man. It causes hurt. For women, repeatedly being told by your husband that I don't have time to talk, or simply ignored, your desire for communication just not paid any attention to, that's what it would feel like. I have women regularly write to me and tell me, my husband doesn't pay me any attention. He won't talk to me. That's what it feels like to your husband when you don't have sex. Here's one fundamental difference that most men and most women have when it comes to sex. Most women want and need to feel emotionally connected, to feel a bond, to feel safe, and have that connection before they are interested in or willing to engage in sex. For most women, a sexual encounter is a result of intimacy. For most men, it's just the opposite. For most men, they see sex as the way to connect with their wives. Again, there are exceptions here. I'm talking in generalities. But when your husband is seeking sex with you, it's often that he is seeking to connect with you. That's what leads him to feel connected. And so when you as a wife reject his sexual advances repeatedly, to him, that usually means you're not worth connecting to. You're not important to me, and your needs are not important to me. Again, this is much more than a physical drive, although certainly there is a physical component, but this is much deeper than that. There's a biological part to this as well. You have probably heard of the bonding hormone, oxytocin, and we know so much more about that than we did just a matter of not many years ago. For women, there are many ways that you can get a hit of oxytocin, so to speak. When you breastfeed, during pregnancy and labor and delivery. In fact, the highest oxytocin levels for most women happen around the time of delivery, and that leads to bonding with their baby. That's God's design, so that women, new mothers, would feel that bond to take care of their child. And there are other times when a woman can get a hit of oxytocin and feel bonding. For men, in general, the only way a man can get a hit of oxytocin is through sex. Now, women get a hit of oxytocin through sex too. But for men, it is generally the only way in which they can get that hit of that bonding hormone. And so again, when your husband is seeking sex with you, he probably is seeking to connect with you. Now, abuse aside, we're talking about people of goodwill, reasonably healthy marriage. There are some things that a man gets through sex that he cannot get any other way. Besides the sense of bonding and connection, having sex affirms his masculinity. It's one of the very few things that he can own, that only he as a man can do. That is separate from everything in his work life. Women can be affirmed in their femininity, again, in various ways, through getting pregnant, having a child, breastfeeding, and so on. There's other things that affirm a woman's masculinity, but sex is the only thing that affirms a man's masculinity at that level, at that deep level. For many men, sex opens the door to communication. I remember speaking with a client not very long ago, and she is struggling in intimacy in her marriage, both emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. And she said, "My husband will never talk. He never is open to having a conversation about anything. But after sex, he's a chatterbox." There's many times when that's the experience that a man has. There's something about that hit of oxytocin that a man gets with having sex that makes him feel safe with you in a way that he may not feel safe at other times. And for a man, when he feels safe, he is much more interested in communication, in talking. Many men are emotionally modest, like women are physically modest. So a man will not feel safe in talking about feelings, in letting his heart be open without that level of safety, and sex gives him that level of safety because of the oxytocin hit. So it opens up the door to communication. That kind of connection emotionally that women can get other ways, your husband often cannot. Now, this is one of the reasons why sex in other contexts can be so damaging. I think large numbers of women have experienced that themselves, but since we're talking about understanding men in this context, a man having sex in other contexts is going to harm his ability to bond with his wife. That's part of what happens with pornography or affairs or whatever. That hit of oxytocin, bonding it with other images or humans lessens the strength of bonding with his wife. So it is just another biological reason why God designed sex to be between one man and one woman in the covenant of marriage. There's even the biological basis for that. Now back to you wives, your husband wants sex and you're really struggling with that. I want to give you a few suggestions of how you can approach this. This is, again, not about saying yes to your husband every time he wants sex. It's not that he is entitled to it. But these are some suggestions that will bring you closer to your husband. First of all, deal with your own sexual stuff. Now, when I read that letter from Bettina at the start of this episode, she said sex has never been hurtful for her. But for her, it was just a matter of she didn't understand the importance of it. But if sex is hurtful to you, deal with it. You know, most, if not all of us, have been sexually harmed in some way. And if that is interfering with your ability to respond to your husband sexually, deal with that. And that's a whole nother topic and worth a great deal of conversation. And we'll talk about that. But I just want to affirm that that is common and worth addressing. If sex is physically painful for you, this does not mean pushing past the physical pain. That is actually likely to create a further wall between you and your husband. Physiologically, if you engage in something that causes physical pain, your body is going to put up barriers. Your brain can split from your body because you're trying to dissociate from the physical pain, and you're going to associate physical pain with whatever caused it, in this case, sex. And so it is going to be harder and harder and harder and harder to engage in physical intimacy. So if there is physical pain, get some help. As an OBGYN, this is an area I have helped many women with. Endometriosis, sadly, is a common situation, but it's very treatable. Vaginismus is another not uncommon condition that is treatable. Menopause, the hormone changes around menopause often lead to vaginal dryness and discomfort. That is treatable. So it's absolutely worth getting medical help if sex is causing physical pain. Just the same, if sex is causing emotional pain because of past trauma, because of past religious messages that have made sex seem dirty to you, past abuse or whatever it's been, get some help. It's worth it for the good of your own soul and the health of your relationship. So that's number one. Deal with your own sexual baggage. Number two, say yes when you can. Again, your husband is not entitled to sex anytime he wants, but say yes when possible. And when you do say no, make it a point to say no to sex, but still say yes to your husband. In other words, make sure that it's clear you don't feel able to engage in the act of intercourse right now, but you still want to be close to your husband. Maybe you're tired and you say, I'm exhausted. I can't be present with you. Can we do it tomorrow morning? Or can we plan on Saturday morning or whatever, so that you are still saying yes to him when you can. That includes dealing with the relationship issues that may be blocking intimacy. Most husbands, at least more commonly, by no means all, more husbands will seek sex as a way to connect and make up. And if there is unfinished business in your relationship, you as a wife can often be a great help to your husband and to the relationship by lovingly addressing the issues in the relationship that need to be handled. You may have greater skills there. And you can do that without making your husband, feel minimized. Talk about the issue that needs to be addressed, not cutting down your husband as a person, but talking about the issue as a third thing that you are working together to address. If that needs to happen before sex, you may be helpful in making that step in your relationship. So again, say yes when you can. Number three, flip that mental switch. Sex begins in the mind. It does not, for most people, begin in the body. And this is something I talk to men about in particular, because for most men, they can be turned on very quickly. Women, on average, need longer to warm up, and the beginning in the mind is a much bigger part of sex for a woman. So if the reason you are holding back with sex from your husband has to do with you're just not interested and it doesn't seem important to you, you can make the mental step toward him, and your body will often follow. You can hold his eyes. You can look at him and pause, hold that look a little longer. Kiss and hold that kiss. Take a mental step toward him. I learned this with my husband. Because of his illness, a lot of our time and energy together was involved in medications and doctor's appointments and dealing with his illness. And there were periods of time when he was not feeling well enough to physically engage in sex. But when he did, when he was able and wanted sex, I had to learn to choose to take a step in that direction and, put the other health concerns aside and enter into that moment. And my body would follow. And I believe for most women, if you have dealt with your baggage, that will be very effective. Make the choice to move toward him in your mind, and your body is a whole lot more likely to follow. And then number 4, I want to encourage you to enjoy, to explore. Sex, again, is not just for your husband's pleasure, it is for you too. Couples who have worked through the challenges of marriage and enjoy intimacy over the long haul often, regularly, talk about enjoying sex well into their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. It is absolutely possible, and it's worth the investment to do so. Sex over time can become increasingly comforting, enjoyable, satisfying, and bonding. It can become an increasingly pleasurable part of your connection together. It's worth that kind of investment. And as a woman, pay attention to the things that you enjoy as well. Learn to talk about sex with your husband. Try things out differently. Some women struggle with feeling like enjoying sex is somehow less godly. There's something that's just kind of not okay, that if you do have sex, God turns his back and temporarily walks out of the room. Not the case at all. The Bible is actually quite steamy. Have you read Song of Solomon? It's very explicit, very erotic. I remember spending a lot of time in Song of Solomon before I got married some years ago, and it did so much to help my soul become ready to enjoy the physical connection. And I would encourage you to consider doing that, and then to have fun with your husband so that you are both feeling pleasure. If what your husband finds pleasurable is different from what you find pleasurable, some couples will alternate. One time, okay, this evening is for him. And then the next time, okay, this time is for her. And the kinds of activities you engage in sex, make sure both of you have times when you are getting the most pleasure. Talk about it. Explore. I believe God smiles. So remember, sex is his idea. If the religious messages around sex have been a problem for you, that is worth dealing with. I love helping women address this. It's one of the things I do coaching about. We have some material on our website. We'll continue to talk about some of these things. I hope that for you as a wife, this has been enlightening and helpful. I have things to say to husbands as well, but this episode is for wives. And I pray that your connection with your husband will become stronger and more meaningful as you take the initiative. You take the initiative to connect emotionally and physically. Your husband will enjoy that as well. And I pray God's blessing on that for you. I would love you to be also part of our online community, the Fully Alive group. Challenges in marriage, including sex, sexual intimacy, communication, and all of that, is one of the big areas we address. We also address things like anxiety and depression, toxic religion, and finding ways to experience the fully alive kind of life that Jesus came to give all of us, physically, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. And you can come join us in our online community, fullyalivegroup.com. I want to thank you for being part of our podcast family. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.